Hello everyone. Welcome to our conversations with public health leaders. I am Dr. Charity, founder of the Next 100 Initiative. Today we have with us Dr. Muyi Aina. He is the CEO of Solina Group and also the Executive Director of Solina Center for International Development and Research. He's a seasoned management consultant and once worked as an engagement manager with McKinsey & Company, a global and leading management consulting firm. He's also a seasoned public health professional and has decades of experience leading teams to deliver complex public health interventions. Welcome, Muyi. It's so great you can join us to inspire an emerging generation of public health stewards and leaders across the continent. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Charity. It's my pleasure to be here and to share.
Great. So, we want to learn from you and hear from you. Let's get you started. Can you please share with us some of the role models or mentors that influenced you early in your public health career?
That's a very interesting question, Charity. I've been fortunate in my life to have quite a set of mentors that have really influenced the way things have worked. And I think of it in terms of mentorship for just my personal and life philosophy, but also mentorship in the area of my profession. I think my dad played a very critical role in shaping who I am as a person in terms of just my outlook to life, relationships, and my values and ethics. I think a lot of who I've become as I reflect really came from who he was and what he taught. He was unique in that beyond showing examples and trying to live in a way that he wanted his children to live, he also was very generous in sharing his mistakes, which is very interesting. When he did things that he found were wrong, he shared generously. On the professional side, I've had quite a few. I will mention maybe two that are American and two that are Nigerian. There is somebody called Professor Robert Redfield. He was the last past director of the CDC. He's a professor emeritus at the University of Maryland, who really handheld me in many different ways and showed me what was possible as an African leader in the global health space. Really, he showed me what was possible if we dedicated ourselves to this path. On my last job, before founding the Solina Group, I worked with a gentleman called Robert Kocher, who's also a physician. He was a partner at McKinsey & Company. And I'd like to think that a lot of the skills that really have enabled me, by the grace of God, to achieve some of the things and influence so many people, the problem solving, the analytical reasoning, and some of the just skills that one has came from mentorship from Bob Kocher. And I think also more recently, I would like to reference two gentlemen. There is Professor Mohammed Pate, who he's a good friend of mine. There's also Dr. Patrick Dakum, who's the chief executive of the Institute of Human Virology in Nigeria. Mohammed Pate is a former health minister of state of Nigeria. As you might know, he's a professor at Harvard right now of global health. These two gentlemen have really played different roles, even without them knowing it, in the evolution of my career. Everything from just being champions to say, hey, go Muyi, you can do it. Go Muyi, you can do it. To being frankly supportive and aiding, almost chaperoning you, me as I went along, guiding, and really more recently just celebrating with you when there are a few wins and really translating some of their own leadership experience to me. So I've been fortunate, to really benefit from a lot of mentorship.
That's great. I hope you caught the part about getting mentors who can be cheerleaders, telling you, go Muyi, go Muyi. That's really important. So let's move to the next question. So in your public health journey, can you please share with us what you see as attributes for leadership effectiveness?
I think there are a few, again, very important question. I think that it's one thing to be a leader, it's another thing to be effective. There is really no such thing as leadership without a productive or effective followership. So I think one of the most important things to me is really the ability to engage and get people to move along with you. And there are a number of things that I have found very helpful in that. One is the ability to set a vision and set a direction in a focused way, but also in an aspirational way. That's the first thing. The second thing is the ability to assemble the right team, a competent team. Competent team in many regards. There's sort of the technical skills, but there's also just the personality mix. But very importantly is the motivation mix. The people who have the right motivation and the right mindset to be aligned with your vision. And then it's the ability to balance. One of the things that, one has gotten better in over the years, but I found can be a make or break, is the ability to balance being a manager and being a leader. Many times you do need to be a manager, which is really pushing people and, and making them do things versus leading them to do things. And I find that every now and then with different teams, with different people, you have to swing between all of that. You never really stop being a manager, even as you become a leader in your role. So those are some of the things that I think are important.
Thanks, thanks for sharing that. And for those who have watched other videos, you will keep hearing setting a vision. So you can see that even Muyi is, it resonates, setting the vision. Thank you so much for sharing that feedback. And quickly moving on and building on your previous content or feedback you shared with us, can you please help us understand or contrast the role between leading a team internally and then as a leader recognizing that you need to also manage relationships externally? Can you please share some of that?
Interesting. There are many similarities, maybe a few differences. Similarities in that, in being effective in your work with people, be it internally, even within your family, your network of friends, or external clients that you do business with, it's understanding that at the other end of the interaction is a human being, and understanding that human beings are very complex, and there is not a golden rule to dealing with everybody. It's understanding that they have a context, they've had a day up until the time they are engaging with you. So I think one of the common things is you have to have in your toolkit a collective of influencing tactics. Influencing meaning your ability to engage and get them to align with what you are thinking. So I find that regardless of whether I'm dealing with people internally, interacting with them, or we are engaging with our partners and clients on the outside, is on trying to get a sense of where they are, and what's the best way to engage with them. The second bit is frankly the ability to listen and respond to people. It's universal. It doesn't matter whether I'm dealing with people internally in my organization or with partners. If people don't feel like you're hearing them, they listen to you less. That's just what I have found. There are a few differences. One of it is that internally we think of ourselves as a family. So when you are dealing with your family, you're a bit more frank with the way you give feedback. You're a bit more aggressive with the way you coach, versus when you're dealing with, fellow established professionals on the outside, who you do give them feedback, you do interact with them, but you tend to be a bit more circumspect and polite, because again, it's a less controlled environment, So that's one of the differences. I also think that another difference may also just be how much of that you feel you need to do yourself versus you need to get others to do. I think you can think of it as similarities or differences, but internally, a lot of times, depending on what we are discussing, you can delegate a lot of interactions to people. Externally, again, depending on the level of the person, you feel you need to engage yourself versus others. So I would probably say there are more similarities than differences, because people are people. Yeah.
So thanks for sharing that. And something, really caught me there. In these days, when we hear the word influencer, our minds go to social media influencer, particularly for an emerging generation. But you heard Muyi speak about having influencing tactics, the ability to influence, both internally and externally. For me, I love the way he puts it, and I've taken that away. Hope you learned that too. Building on your feedback, Can you help us to understand what you look out for when putting together a management team? I know you've spoken a lot about the larger team, and maybe some of what you've said will apply, but just to hear that perspective, a management team, what would you look out for?
This is one area, Charity, where I have probably learned the most over the years. If I look at where I am now versus where I was 2 decades or even a decade ago, it used to be that I really valued intelligence and skill in people. But over the years, I've since learned that that's probably the easier end of the spectrum to come about. You can buy smart people. You can always find somebody to hire that is skilled in something. But what I found that is more important, but also much harder to find, is the right mindset. Mindset along the number of dimensions. Integrity. Is this person, true to what they say and true to what you can be aligned on as a team and as an organization. The other approach is there a sense of ownership? Is this an individual who wants a job or an individual who wants to create something, who wants to own something, who wants to have influence? Again, we're talking about a management team. I think, of course, it's important to look out for some competence. You can't be totally incompetent and be effective you would make the team weak. But I find that by a long stretch, what is more important is the mindset of the individual and just their willingness. This is also very important because leaders tend to be somewhat experienced people, almost always. I find that much more so than your previous experiences is your willingness to learn and evolve is more important as a leader. And on many dimensions, the people you will work with, they're young, they're dynamic, they're learning things every day. Just that openness to absorb, from them things that would be strange when we were growing up. Funny that we can say that now, Charity. but things that would be strange when we were growing up. Just their openness to understand it and potentially absorb it. I find that very useful in people that I would recommend and prioritize as co-leaders.
How would you address team members that are underperforming, or those you realize are not a poor fit?
Very important question. Thankfully, not incredibly common in our space, but it's not a rarity. Every now and then you do have colleagues that are struggling at many different levels. And the way we have come at them, again, because we think of ourselves as a family, is to think of it as a shared problem to start with, which is what are some of the underlying factors here. And we have found almost always that it's a mix of the person's fit, as you put it, but also the accommodation that we've been able to provide. If we have a philosophy that if we've assessed you and determined that you're able to do this work, if something's not working, something's not working, we do everything to try to figure it out. So is it something, sometimes it's people are just going through a bad period personally and they're not able to balance it, and we've seen that and been able to advise ways to manage it. Sometimes it's interpersonal conflict on the teams that need to be surfaced and addressed. But every now and then you do find people who truly are just not able to do the work for many different reasons. And every single time, by the way, it's much less about the mindset. It's much more about the mindset than about the skill set. Because almost nothing is rocket science, if I can say that. Usually it's people who are not as open to adapting to situations and learning, new ways or different ways of doing things. They tend to be the ones that are not a good fit with us. And what do? The first step, which is usually the hardest step, is getting the individual to recognize that there is a problem and what the problem is. Again, when you have the person with the wrong mindset, the default, in my experience, has been finger pointing. Oh, my manager is this, oh, my colleague is this, oh, my organization is doing this and that. It always takes a bit of a while and some conversation to get the person to say, what's my role in this? What's my contribution to this misfit? And sometimes when you're able to get the person to that point and they say, yeah, actually, maybe this is what my contribution is, then they can make a U-turn. When you have trouble getting them to that point, then we go through the process of saying, okay, at least can we agree that we can be friends, but we're not a good match for each other. And then we're very supportive in helping people plan and execute transitions. We will give you some time, we would help you, we would connect you with our network to find roles that you've defined is what you're looking for to the extent possible. Every now and then, it's not in 100% of the cases that it's been so smooth. Every now and then people are so angry or unhappy that, they leave angrily, but that's thankfully quite rare in our setting.
Great, thanks for sharing that, and thanks for at least sharing the extreme of the spectrum, and we're happy that it's rare. So just a quick follow-up question. So this is about team members, and then we want to ask you about reporting up. Because even as CEO, executive director, you're reporting up, and then your previous positions or engagements. Can you please share some of your best practices from your learning about reporting up?
This is an interesting one because yes, even as a chief executive, I do have a board that I report to, but also the way the organization also works is, yes, there is a chief executive at the apex, but big decisions are almost never really made as an individual. There is a committee of principals that will typically sit, and you have to make your case. And that's one. Then two, because a lot of people report to me, I can also speak from the perspective of those that do better than others in terms of the outcomes. And it's emotional intelligence, understanding that the person you're reporting to is a person, understanding where they will be coming from, understanding what their interests might be, but very importantly, and this is a big thing that I see, is understanding their preferred mode of communication. Too many times I have experienced and I have seen debates between supervisors and team members that really shouldn't be a debate, but it's really just a style debate, which is, look, some people prefer you to give them a context and rationale, justify an ask, and then make an ask. Mm-hmm. Some people prefer you to make an ask, and if they want to know why, they ask you why. Mm-hmm. Understanding that is halfway in getting people to hear you and understand you. Too many times people are talking, people wait to respond rather than listen to understand because of a misfit in communication styles. And as human beings, I've been guilty of this many times too. We tend to prefer and demand our listeners to listen the way we prefer to communicate. That just doesn't always work. Now, if you are the boss, sometimes you can get away with it. But if you are reporting to somebody, it's particularly important that you understand that this is this individual's preferred mode of communication. Do they want me to just get to the point and tell them what I need, or do they want a little bit of rigmarole and background before we get to the point? Yeah.
Thanks very much. It's so real. You're really affirming things I have experienced myself. Thank you so much for sharing that. Just before we leave this domain around talent and relating with people, Can you please share your experiences around, talent identification these days and, retention and, anything you can share around that to inspire us?
I don't think there is a Charity. I don't think there's a more important question you could be asking at this point, because it used to be that we all worried about retention and application and identification, recruitment and retention and all that, but that's all out the door now, given what we've experienced over the last 12 months. I think that Nigeria and certainly the rest of Africa, we work across several countries, is experiencing the biggest brain drain that the continent has ever experienced. The outflow is massive. Now, what's particularly of note to us is that the development sector is experiencing a brain drain. So people are leaving development to go into private businesses, to go into the private sector, which has slightly, somewhat different incentives. Sometimes it's because they pay better, but frankly, and I've interviewed a lot of people who've made that switch, you'll be surprised to find that some of the reason is that development work is hard. It's actually hard because it's so complicated to achieve results. You have a mandate, you have a goal, but you also do it with your heart. So it's very draining on you. If your job is to write a code, you write a code. If it works, if it doesn't work, you keep working at it and it eventually works. There's nothing emotional about that. But development work takes an emotional toll on people, and that's something that we have not, certainly I have not paid attention to it hitherto until I got this feedback that sometimes people just feel drained by that. So that's a big issue, and it is a problem. So there are many things that we need to do differently. One is just the way we recruit. How do you? It used to be that people came to the development space because, at least in our setting in Nigeria and many African countries, because it offered great jobs and benefits. I mean, a lot of international organizations, so some of the smartest people would be attracted to that. But post-COVID, that's been tested in that only people who are truly mission driven actually want to remain, because everybody now has a ton of options. You can stay here and get a job anywhere in the world. You can move anywhere in the world. The macro issues that are going on around just the economic situation of the country and the continent, but also the insecurity around people and just a sense of hopelessness, if I might say that, is really, so there's a push factor to people. And then there's a pull factor because there is workforce shortages in many, if not most, developed countries. There's a competition for talent in a way that wages have skyrocketed, and it's very difficult for the development sector to compete. So those forces, the push and pull factor, will probably continue for a little bit. So we need to rethink who we are attracting and how we are engaging with them and how we are retaining them. And I don't have all the answers to that, but we have some initial things that we're thinking about.
If anything, one thing you said that just resonated with me was the bit about draining. As you know, I work in the sector, and I've known that we discuss burnout and everything, but it's actually tough and it's draining. So that's really touched me. And building on that, the fact that we work in a sector that is you can just get exhausted, burnout, drain. How do you decide as a leader what and when to say no? What to say yes to and what to say no to?
Obviously, at some point, you can't really say yes to everything. So you have to to prioritize. I have a simple framework. One is, does this align with my own personal mission? That's one, so it's eligible for consideration. Then two is there somebody else that can do this as well or better than I can, who probably has a little bit more availability than I do? If the answer is a yes, I nudge that opportunity in that direction. If the answer is a no, then I try to fit it in. So it's a two-step question. Is one, is this a good fit engagement? If it is there somebody else that can do it as well, or maybe even better? If they are, and I can persuade them to do it, hey, please do it. If not, then I know that I have to take it on.
I like the way you said it's eligible for consideration. So it has to even fit my own mission for it to be eligible. Then we can have more conversations around whether I'm interested. That's great. So how about self-renewal? What do you do about that?
So what I find is that because the work involves a lot of travel, I find that I'm able to reflect and relax a lot more when I'm not traveling. So renewal for me is time with family and doing the most mundane things, making the hair of my daughters, cleaning and sweeping around the house, literally gardening outside the home, and just spending time with family, the things that you will ordinarily do if you had time, and as a parent and as a family person. I find those very rejuvenating. Sometimes I take some time to just be on myself, to just reflect and think. So I take a walk and just think and just reflect, and that's when I get clarity of ideas. So it's simple things. One of the less interesting things about me, and even my family doesn't appreciate this, is that I'm not a big fan of holiday travel. If I want to go on holiday, just leave me at home on the couch. Let me do nothing. Travel is something for me. Just leave me to do nothing and let me just be and hang around with the family. For me, that's most relaxing, and just that time, conversations. And I do ask my young children about my work. I say, I have this problem. What do you think? It can be incredibly cute and illuminating when a child analyzes a situation and gives you a suggestion, and you'll be shocked how often I have handled it. I find this particularly useful in instances of conflict, interpersonal conflict, because the children are not emotionally engaged, they are not burdened by all the political correctness or anything else that an adult they don't have all the context and the baggage. They come at this very simplistically, and simple interventions often tend to be the best.
I should try that. I should try that with the younger ones. I should try that. Great. We're just rounding up. We're just emerging or trying to recover from a pandemic. We can't run away from touching on that. What has the pandemic taught you about public health leadership?
It's taught me a number of things. One is that we don't really know as much as we thought we knew. One of the things that shocked me and put me through a period where I just felt I've never, prior to the pandemic, I don't remember ever feeling totally out of control. I always felt like, if you give me enough time and resources, I can figure this out. But people that I looked up to, people who trained me, my mentors, didn't seem to have a clue what to do. And every day things were emerging and evolving on us before we could figure it out. I think that was very humbling. So the takeaway from that for me is that we have to keep learning. We have to keep an open mind. I suspect that in retrospect, one day when we do look back and say what were some of the mistakes that the public health community made in our response to COVID, which had a substantial toll in terms of lives and morbidity, was thinking we knew what to do. thinking we knew. We responded very quickly, deployed acute care where the countries could afford it, and it turned out it was mostly a waste, and it just cost lives, and the developing countries borrowed money and got a lot of aid and bought a ton of equipment that was completely useless. Whereas the things that really mattered, which is, it's a viral infection. How do you, one, give the basic treatment that people need, but also prevent it with a vaccine? It took a much longer and a much complicated process to actually get to the countries where they needed it. I think that is one thing in terms of public health leadership. And then the other thing is that, the field of public health is rapidly changing. It's no longer an isolated field. Everything is public health. The economy is public health. Behavioral science is public health. It's no longer just pandemics or diseases or things, because the pandemic happened and everything came to a halt. Families broke because of it. New families were made, babies were born because of the pandemic. So everything, public health is everything. And I think we need to really stop thinking about public health as a vertical or a narrow field, but just public health and development seem to converge in terms of what they represented to me.
Absolutely, I completely align with you. So, we have come to the end of such a great opportunity to just learn from you. And everything you have shared, they're all important. But if you were just to remind us of 3 key points that the emerging public health leaders should just take away from this time with you, what would those 3 points be?
As I reflect, I think I would probably prioritize the following. One is that leadership requires vision, just the ability to imagine and envision what does not exist. That's the first thing. The second thing is that leadership is about leading people who are humans, like you are. That is probably the second thing. And then the third thing, open-mindedness, open-mindedness, open-mindedness. We learn every day. There is no such thing as an expert. I have learned when someone's introduced to me as this is an expert in something, I'm polite usually on the outside, but I roll my eyes on the inside, because many times I had thought I was an expert, and then I realized I know very little. So I think leadership, I would prioritize those 3 things. One is always have a vision, be leading somewhere that you're able to articulate and ginger people around. 2 is understanding that it's about leading people. Not going it alone and dragging people around. It's about leading them. And then the third thing is just be open to learn. Yeah.
There you have it. All that information from Dr. Muyi Aina. Thank you so much for spending time with us to inspire the emerging generation of public health leaders across the continent. Till our next conversation, I want to thank Dr. Muyi and stay connected. Dr. Muyi.
Thank you for the opportunity to share from the little experiences that we have, and I look forward to partnering in the future.
Thank you. Stay inspired.